Hello everybody, this is General Yanis, and today in Death Card Tactics I'm going to be looking at the enemy tanks and how can we face them as Death Card, how can we efficiently take down enemy tanks and vehicles before they do serious damage to our own army. So with no further ado, let's get started. So today, the 21st of May, I've registered for my first Warhammer 40k tournament in October here in Copenhagen. So hopefully it will be, yeah, it will. Of course, I hope that the restrictions are gone by then, so it can be played, and it will be really exciting to play tournament. But as I said, for today's videos, I'm looking at enemy tanks and vehicles that are there. They come in all different shapes, sizes, and colors in Warhammer 40k. And more often than not, we will be facing quite a few dangerous vehicles and transports from the opponent army. So in this video, I'm looking at the best ways to take out the enemy tanks as Death Guard, giving some background for the analysis, looking at the ranged weapons. Can we take out enemy tanks from range? What will that be the best weapons, the best units, best combos to do so? And then moving into melee combat, what weapons, units, and combos do we have for melee? And then giving some conclusions and some summary and final thoughts. So let's take a look. So the analysis, let's say background for this analysis, there are quite a few tanks or heavy vehicles in Warhammer 40k, and they typically have a high toughness, normally toughness 7 or toughness 8. They typically have good base armor saves of 2+ or 3+, and sometimes they have some invul saves for 5+. For example, our Plagueburst Scroller is an example of a very durable tank with toughness 8 and 5+ invul save. And normally the tanks and the vehicles here, they have a high number of wounds to take out, more than 10 wounds. But then having more than 10 wounds means that they can be bracketed when damaged. So even if we maybe cannot take an enemy tank fully out, we can bracket it so it shoots with degraded profiles, etc. Many times these tanks pose a very big threat to our units, and we cannot just ignore them and hide. That could also be one way, is ignoring a tank if it's, or a transport, if it doesn't have very high powerful weaponry. We can just basically ignore them and play the game, but sometimes they are such a threat they will be tearing up our infantry if we let them unopposed, or our own vehicles or our own characters. And therefore we need to deal with them. And sometimes it's transports that we need to open up to get to the dangerous contents, like the Dark Eldar Raiders. So it's the Raider, of course, can pose a threat, but it's more to get to the insides because they can shoot from within the Raider. So what is the best way as Death Guard to deal with dangerous tanks, and looking at the weapons and units for ranged as well as melee? And here is some tanks I've been looking at. Here you can see the various tanks from different armies, the toughness, the save, if they have invul saves, the number of wounds, and if they have discussing resilience or other rules. So we see there is a high number of tanks with toughness 7, Astra Militarum tanks, for example, or Eldar vehicles, or Space Marine vehicles. Some of them have invul saves, lots of wounds. Normally a 3+ save. There is a lot of tanks also, or vehicles that don't have invul saves. Those are a bit easier to deal with. And then we have, I also included the Doomsday Arc from the Necrons, so the Raider and the Ravager from the Dark Eldar, and the Scorpius Dune Rider from AdMech. And then, of course, analytically, it doesn't make a big difference if it's a Manticore or a Chimera or a Chaos Rhino. For the durability purpose, basically those can be treated as the same as a unit having toughness 7, 3 save, and yeah, 10 wounds or so. So looking then at shooting weapons to take out enemy tanks and vehicles, what would be an ideal weapon? Of course, a good weapon to shoot the vehicle targets should have high strength, preferably 7 or higher strength. a high armor piercing value to not allow for high saves. So ideally -3 or better -4, and then they don't have typically a save for the attack. Of course, high damage to take out a lot of wounds or high number of shots. D3 plus 3 damage it has a very high damage output and consistency. D6 plus 2, the meltas at half range. D6 weapons can also do quite good damage, but it's very disheartening to make the hits, and then you only score 1 or 2 wounds. Straight damage 3 or something like this could be quite interesting. Of course, weapons that can deal mortal wounds are always interesting, bypassing, let's say, the toughness or the saves of the opponent. Dealing mortal wounds, of course, helps, especially with his difficult to take out targets. Some good range would be good, so coming very close can be dangerous before we can do damage to the vehicle, so preferably more than 24-inch. The gun platform itself should be quite durable to be able to take some shots by itself. So in an exchange, a tank-to-tank duel, then of course exchanging a couple of salvos, it would be good that it's not like a glass cannon unit. And of course, if the unit shooting is a core unit, then there is a good opportunity to buff further the damage output. And basically nearly all our weapons would be benefiting if the enemy unit is within contagion range of some forward units, giving the tanks a -1 toughness. Bringing them down can make a lot for the wound rolls. Additionally, if we have the inexorable ferric blight contagion, we can add AP to our shooting weapons to bypass the saves and score more damage. So I've been looking at the last cannons, entropy cannons, the plague scroller mortar, defiler cannon, the meltas, of course, the crack missiles, all with very high strength and good AP. The mortar and the defiler cannon have a lower AP. They could even more benefit from getting the improvement from ferric blight. The plague sprayer from the fall blight spawn can be increased the strength to 8 with a pathogen, and especially with a viscous death pathogen, we also get D6 shots with rerolling. Plasma guns come to, let's say, the bottom part of the high strength weapons. If we supercharge them, we have a strength 8 weapon with good AP, 2 damage. Of course, if we are shooting at a unit with disgusting resilience type rules, then this is not a very efficient weapon. The normal plasma gun suffers a bit from the strength 7 only, and only 1 damage. Then we have the twin culverins that the contemptor can use. That in itself, it doesn't seem very very strong, but it deals mortal wounds, and therefore it can have a high damage output. I'm also looking at the blight launcher, the speeders, and then looking at some more infantry weapons that our core units have, just to see how efficient or inefficient they are against vehicles. And you can see some of these weapons, of course, they can be carried by our core units, and then they can be further buffed by rerolls, etc. So for those shooting weapons, what is the damage output baseline? And here you can see the different tanks being shot at, like a plague scroller signifying one of the toughest and most durable tanks out there, Land Raider, and the Lehman Russ, the Gladiator, etc. Coming down to this group where it's a toughness 7, a save 3+, and no invul saves, like the Rhino and the Manticore and the Predator, etc., Doomsday Arcs, and etc., going down. And here we can see the various weapons here, how much wounds would they be doing on average. And here is on average for all the vehicles, and then specifically for the vehicles. So not many shooting weapons by themselves can be expected to bring a multi-wound tank down. For example, 2 entropy cannon shots on a Lehman Russ tank, they are expected to do 4 wounds in damage. The plague scroller mortar would be doing, let's say, 2 wounds on top of that. Some yeah, and basically some of the best anti-tank weaponry that we have at Death Guard are the entropy cannons with T3 plus 3 wounds. The multi-meltas, of course, are quite strong. The Volkite culverin, if we have 2 on a contemptor, giving 16 shots, we can also do very good damage, and a lot of this damage comes from the mortal wounds. And here you can see for the Raider, for example, then the twin Volkite culverins, 2 of those are one of the best damage outputs for a Raider. So looking at the units themselves after the weapons, let's say, and looking at an example where we are firing at a toughness 8 tank with no invul save from long range, we can see here that the unbuffed damage here, the baseline damage, if we take a Plaguebearer Scroller with entropy cannons and slugger, this gives the highest damage output unbuffed, so it will be doing 6 wounds on average on such a tank, and this costs us 175 points to put on the table. And then we can see the Defiler with twin las cannons and Havoc Launcher would be doing 5 wounds on average. We have a Contemptor with 2 twin Volkites, 4 wounds on average. The Hellbrute with multi-melt and missile, 3 wounds, and is the same as the Mephitic Blightholder. And then here, as a baseline, I also add the Blight Lords and Plague Marines. The 10 Blight Lords with 2 Blight Launchers, we're doing 2.6 wounds, but this is for a whooping 420 point cost. And 10 Plague Marines with 2 Blight Launchers and 3 Supercharged Plasmas would be doing 2.3 wounds. So not a lot of wounds, baseline damage here to take down enemy tanks from range. But we can boost the damage. So for example, for the Plaguebearer Scroller, we can boost the damage by using the Disgusting Force stratagem. And if the enemy on top of that is in -1 toughness range, and we have the Ferric Blight contagion on the opponent, then we would be doing 10 wounds on average. So now it starts to look where we could be lucky and take out a heavy tank in one round of shooting from a Plaguebearer Scroller. The Defiler cannot be boosted as much. We can boost its output only by the contagions. The Contemptor, being a core, can be boosted significantly, giving reroll 1s to hit, +1 to hit from the Talisman, Tollkeeper Relic, and then the enemy being in contagions, it would be doing around 10 wounds. So this is a good improvement for the Contemptor with Twin Volkite. The Hellbrutes can really boost their damage. We have the Fire Fever stratagem giving +1 to hit and +1 to wound. We have rerolls, we have the Tollkeeper, we have the enemy being contagion. We can do the highest damage here buffed. And then the Mephitic Blightholder, again, some of the units we cannot buff the damage output as much, only 4 wounds. And here we can see the Blight Lords and Plague Marines with bolters and ranged weapons. If we add virulent rounds, +1 to hit from Talisman, Tollkeeper rerolling, and the enemy being contagion, suddenly we can greatly multiply the damage output of those units. So the Plaguebearer Scroller has the best baseline damage. The damage can be boosted by the Disgusting Force, and the Defiler and Mephitic Blightholder can do some decent damage, but cannot be buffed more only by contagions. The Hellbrute and Contemptor and Blight Lords and Plague Marines do less baseline damage, but because they have the core keyword, they can be significantly buffed by auras and stratagems, etc. But being able to take also a salvo from the enemy tank and fight back, etc. Plaguebearer Scroller and the Contemptors seem to be the best option for ranged. Hellbrute, there is quite a high risk that it would be taken out first before it has the chance to do a lot. So a Hellbrute will not be able to take as much punishment back as a Plaguebearer Scroller here. Moving into to shorter range, when we go to 12-inch range, multi-meltas and meltas in general become stronger in short range and damage D6 +2 for multi-meltas, plasma guns can rapid fire. We can also start using melta guns for our troops here. The foul blight spawn also comes in range, and he can do decent damage. And the foul blight spawn is only doing let's say 2 wounds against the toughness 8 tank. But if we use the viscous death pathogen and the enemy is in contagion range, we would be tripling this damage to 6 wounds. One interesting unit is the Terax drill that can basically deep strike, arrive within 9 inch of the enemy. Hopefully it could get into shooting range of a nasty vehicle, and he has 5 melta gun shots, so it should be able to, if the enemy is in contagion range, it should be able to do 12 wounds here at short range. The Plague Burst Crawler, of course, doesn't matter. With Entropy Cannon and Slugger, it's the same if it's in long range or short range. And the Contemptor is the same. Hellbrute and Mephitic Blightholder are better than at shorter range because their multi-meltas are damage d6 plus 2, but again, it will be more dangerous, let's say, to bring the Hellbrute as close, and it needs also all these extra buffs to reach the very high, being able to be close to the Taliman and etc. To be able to do the damage here at short range. Blight Lords, Plague Marines, their damage is also improved. Now we can use for our core units, we can also buff them with Arch Contaminator, re-rolling all 2 wound rolls, especially helpful against the tough enemy vehicles. So we can, from not so high baseline damage, we can do very high damage with a big unit of ranged Marines or Blight Lords. At closer range with all the buffs illustrated here. And then we also should remember the Plague Skull of Glothila relic, giving us the ability to do 4.6 mortal wounds to do so. The tricky part, I think, for our infantry in this short range would be to come so close. To go there, of course, our infantry has the ability to deep strike, for example, the Blight Lords or the Death Shroud, but then they will not be able to it's more tricky then to give them to have an Arch Contaminator nearby, or having the Tollkeeper relic, rerolls, etc. So we can buff them with some stratagems, etc., but not as much as needed to take out an enemy tank. If we look at melee weapons, then the ideal weapons for melee is basically a lot of the same criteria as we have for the ranged weapons. High strength is required, preferably 7 or more. High AP, high damage, or high number of attacks, let's say. Adding mortal wounds, like with Biologus Purifier or the relics, is of course always improving the damage output. Multiple attacks and a good weapon skill. Enemy would, in this scenario, be in contagion range, suffering -1 toughness, so this helps naturally all our melee attacks, and the core units, of course, can be further buffed. So here, some of the most interesting weapons are the Defiler Claws, of course, Mortarion's Silence, we have the Defiler Scourge, we have the weapons for our Plague Marines with high strength. Here we can see weapons with down to strength 8, and even our lower strength weapons can make some good damage against tank opponents. So looking at the melee weapons from the previous table and the damage output base, we see the base damage output of our melee weapons is quite strong compared to our ranged weapons. So in melee we have more strong units and more strong weapons. So here, for example, Mortarion's Silence can do a huge amount of damage regardless of the enemy vehicle here. We have some good relics like the Reaper of the Glorious Entropy. The Hellforged Sword from the Demon Prince is good. The Defiler Claws again, so high damage output. The Mower Blow Drone, etc., etc. And now looking at melee units versus Toughness 8 tank example. So we can see we have here the baseline damage of the various of some interesting units here in melee, and here the buffed maximum buffed damage output. So we can see, of course, Mortarion can dish out a tremendous amount of damage with his eviscerating blow. Mortarion can pick himself to reroll all 2 hit rolls, so he doesn't miss these 7 attacks he has as a base. And even versus the toughness 8 enemy vehicles, the Mortarion should be able to take any such vehicle out in 1 round of combat. 10 Plague Marines with melee weapons, with flails and cleavers and maces, etc., should also be able to, just by the baseline, do 15-16 wounds here, taking out big targets with no needs for buff. 5 Death Shrouds, also very high damage output, and then the Defiler, almost 10 wounds with a Scourge and its Defiler Claw. And then the Demon Prince with a Hellforged Sword is also quite good, and then we have less damage output from some of the other units. And lots of our core units are very strong in melee and can be buffed additionally, being core with reroll auras, etc. We can just see here some example: 10 Plague Marines in melee. If we give them the Trench Fighters stratagem for more attacks with knives, reroll once to hit, Arch Contaminator close by, and Pioligus Putrifier to do mortal wounds with 6s to wound, we suddenly we get 47 wounds output. So a unit of 10 Plague Marines would be able to kill several vehicles theoretically if they are buffed appropriately. So this is a huge damage output. Of course, the tricky part is to get all the Plague Marines into contact with the enemy vehicles. The Death Shroud can also be buffed, getting up to 25 wounds, so +1 to hit. They can get that from a stratagem. Rerolls from a Lord, Arch Contaminator, Biologus again. They can do significant damage. Here is their cleave profile, the strong profile. The Defilers damage output cannot be buffed. Further, it already has a -1 toughness contagion. I assumed here. The Demon Prince with Sword can buff his damage output with a Warp Insect Hive Relic from Mortarion's Anvil. So 13 wounds here, otherwise only 8 wounds. Still can take out some high damage, high wound enemy vehicle. The Spawn and the Possessed can also be buffed as being a core unit. Lord of Contagion with Warp Insect Hive and the Pathogen Explosive Outbreak can do 12 wounds. So some good combos here. Blight Lords with standard axes again can be buffed. Even 10 Plague Marines, just standard 10 Plague Marines with bolters and knives, with the Trench Fighters +1 to hit. Rerolls, Arch Contaminator and Biologus Putrifier should be able to do 14 wounds. And then, interestingly, 20 Poxwalkers would only be able to do 1 wound on average with their improvised weapons. But if we do the Mutant Strain stratagem, we would be getting six mortal wounds on average on top. If we combine it with the Wrathful Dead from Harbingers, allowing all non-6s to be rerolled, we will be doing 13 wounds on average. So 20 Poxwalker units with this combo should be able to take out a tough enemy tank, let's say, or close taking it out. So reaching to the summaries from this analysis, we have quite a few options as a death guard to deal with enemy tanks. Regarding ranged and especially longer range, the Plagueburst Crawler with the Entropy and Slugger configuration is a good durable anti-tank choice. Can be buffed with a Disgusting Force stratagem to make more damage with a mortar. 2 Plagueburst Crawlers should be able to take out an enemy tank, a heavy enemy tank like a Gladiator if we shoot everything on that, and one of them has a Disgusting Force stratagems, and basically they can manage themselves in the backfield. They don't need babysitting or buffing to be able to do good damage with their entropy cannons. And their mortar, we have access to this stratagem, and we don't need other support units. Of course, they would of course benefit from the enemy being in contagion range of another unit. The Contemptors with Twin Volkites can be buffed significantly with the Talisman especially, and rerolls dealing large number of mortal wounds, so also very efficient long range even for anti-tanks. The Hellbrute mathematically can be buffed to do crazy high damage, however is not as durable as the other options to both give and to be able to take some damage, so the Hellbrute might have might be taken out quicker. The Plague Scholar can be shooting for multiple rounds probably. With the proper buffs, stacking a lot of buffs, also ranged armed Plague Marines and Blight Lords can deal some good damage. Not the Blight Lords are not as point efficient, so a big unit of 400 points buffed with a lot of buffs can do similar damage like a buffed Plague Scroller for less point cost. As I said, all ranged Death Guard units would benefit from the enemy being in contagion range of other units, and the Ferric Blight contagion from the Inexorable for additional AP can help the damage output, especially for the Mortar and especially for the Volkites. At shorter range, Meltas become more powerful. The Foul Blight spawn with a Viscous Death becomes interesting. 3 Mephitic Blight Holders at 12 inch should be able to take out an enemy tank and don't need babysitting. We can't buff their damage output so much. The Terax Drill has the ability to deep strike basically, and it can shoot 5 Melta shots before being able to be targeted itself. Core units with buffs, grenades, etc. can also do high damage at short range. Also Arch Contaminator trait comes into play, allowing us to reroll the wound rolls. And Plague Skull of Glothilla Relic can always come in handy to take out a remaining wounds of a particularly nasty vehicle. In melee, the Death Guard units are naturally stronger compared to range damage, and as such we have some good options that can take out vehicles in close combat. Mortarion, the math shows that Mortarion should be able to one-shot or one kill any vehicle in one round of combat. The extra advantage is that he's fast flyer. He can reach quite far on the table, and he's also quite durable. But he's of course an expensive option. 500 points, a quarter of your army if you're playing 2,000 points, and he will be a shot magnet. But if he can come in close, take out one vehicle, tag another, he should be able, if he can come into close combat with these guys, they should be smoking and take out basically. The Death Shroud should also be able to do big damage, especially if the champion is equipped with a Reaper of Glorious Entropy for more mortal wounds. 5 Death Shroud should be able to take out tough vehicles, and Vermid Whispers can be added from Deep Strike, let's say giving +1 to hit. No need to have a buffing character close by for the Death Shroud. Deep Strike, of course, can be tough to make the 9-inch charge. If they fail their charge, they are left exposed for shooting. That's of course the problem with Deep Strike, and additionally, unfortunately, we don't have anything in the Death Guard Codex to make our charge rolls better. The Plague Marine melee equipped Plague Marines can take out vehicles with Plague Cleavers, Flails, Maces, etc. The most challenging thing here would be to get all the Plague Marines to come into range. Terax Drills Transportation could be an interesting combo. The Terax Drill can transport them, it can shoot its Melta guns, and then the Plague Marines hopefully can do their charge. Demon Prince with Hellforged Sword, that's a good combo, and the Warp Insect Hive. The Demon Prince also is a fast flyer with wings. If he can get into close combat with his vehicles, he would either kill them or severely damage them, escorted maybe by blow drones with mowers to add some more wounds on the table. The Defiler with Claws and Scourge can do good damage if it can survive the walk up the table. It's also quite durable. Lord of Contagion, also a good character with the Explosive Outbreak Pathogen and the Warp Insect Hive. He can Deep Strike and reach some vehicles, hopefully. The Poxwalkers with the stratagems for the mortal wounds, and core units buffed by Biologus for mortal wounds. It could be a good idea against these tough opponents here, the tough targets. Possessed and Chaos Spawn. could add another benefit. They are faster than our normal core units, and they can close down the gap, maybe lock down the enemy vehicles, and they can also do quite some damage by themselves into melee. So reaching to the final thoughts here, I think a combined approach in the army with some plague burst crawlers, contemptors, and/or mephitic blight holders, providing some long-range anti-tank capabilities would always be helpful. The plague burst crawlers mortar can also be used, of course, to take out elite infantry. The entropy cannons are really good. It's a really good weapon against other tanks, and the plague burst crawler in itself is one of the most durable tanks, so the opponent will have struggled to take it out before the plague burst crawler maybe has taken out the high value vehicle targets of the enemy. Putting the enemy tanks in contagion range for improved effects of the long range shooting or the ranged anti-tank capabilities of the units. In melee, we have some very strong melee-oriented characters like Mortarion, Demon Prince, the Lord of Contagion, and Typhus. Once those characters are in engagement range, they can deal massive damage to enemy tanks. They also have psychic powers. They can do some smites also to add some more mortal wounds. And Death Shroud Terminators, they are like mini HQ characters, especially if the champion has the Reaper of Glorious Entropy. They can do quite a lot with no need of buffing or other characters nearby buffing them. Core units like the Plague Marines and the Blightlord Terminators can do good damage in both ranged and melee combat if they're buffed appropriately by Virion and giving rerolls. For example, the Talisman +1 to hit, Tollkeeper Relic for the range damage, Biologus Putrifier, mortal wounds in melee, Arch Contaminator, etc. Even with their Plague Knives, even with the Bubonic Axes, they can still do a lot of damage if buffed properly. So this concludes this video. What do you think about the analysis, and what do you think about taking down enemy tanks in the games? What is your experience from your games? I'm quite pleased with the Plague Burst Crawler being able to shoot down and to deal a lot of wounds with its entropy cannons on enemy vehicles. Let me know your comments below. If you like this video, please press like and subscribe to the channel, where I will bring you more Death Guard tactics videos going forward and Warhammer Mathhammer analysis. And if you want to support my efforts further and appreciate the effort it takes to bring you all these numbers, please visit my Patreon page and become a patron, supporting the efforts, being part of the roadmap. And with these words, General Organis is signing out. Stay safe out there, and bye-bye.